everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on the global food security and agriculture. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Rob and Mr. David Smith. And food safety, security, agriculture is a major challenges right now. Now everywhere around the world, food price increasing. We do not have enough subsidy for agriculture. We have a lot of challenges for the agriculture industry. So, Mr. Rob, what you want to discuss about that?
Well, agriculture is facing a number of significant threats. Largest is climate change, which is turning large swaths of arable land into basically deserts or flooded areas, depending on what side of the weather event's occurring. And it's resulting in large migrations of people from some parts of the world that are facing these weather events to other parts of the world, with us in the U.S. taking a good deal of the brunt of the problem, but certainly other countries in Europe also being faced with large number of immigrants that are leaving their countries for a variety of reasons. And so being able to preserve the food supply in your nation is critical to the survival of that nation, to being able to retain people, to be able to keep people safe and provide a decent way of life. When dealing with these variety of issues, and the issues are, I mentioned climate change, but there are others. The proliferation of pesticides and the resulting contamination, the inability to distribute more resistant crops to some of the areas that most need them because of costs and patents, and a lack of advanced technology for farming and funding for that technology. There are ways to overcome a number of these problems, including moving farming inside and putting farming into a contained environment and using the same kinds of mechanisms that we would use if we were farming in outer space to a large extent, to farm inside buildings. And that way you can get away from using pesticides altogether, which are to a large extent carcinogenous and cause broader problems when they're in use. For instance, out here, the overuse of pesticides has pretty much wiped out a major portion of the bee population, which means we don't have pollinators, and pollinators are having an adverse impact on top of the climate change on field yield. So in the end, it really requires, I think, us to step back a bit, take a look at the food supply problem, and approach it holistically. Reduce waste. A lot of food is just thrown out and disposed of, because it can't be moved from an area that has oversupply to areas that are undersupplied easily. So we have transport issues. Getting rid of pesticides for the most part altogether, because the harm that they are doing now appears to be exceeding the benefits that they provide. Making sure that fertilizers are environmentally safe and don't also increase the risk of pollution and the introduction of carcinogens and hostile biological entities into our environment. And making sure that people that are farming are trained and have available to them the latest in technologies that will allow them to do the job safely, effectively, and efficiently, so farms themselves can be run profitably. Where that has been, at least of late, one of the major significant problems is actually allowing the farmers to have a decent income. So in the end, this is a complex, multifaceted problem. We have the technology and the capability to fix it. We just need to make sure those capabilities and the technology is applied to the people that need it and in the areas that are most affected. And so we can deal with a lot of the overall issues surrounding the shortages of food and clean water. That's my opening.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith.
That's it. And I'll say, let me be the bad guy. You guys be the good guy.
Sharif, thank you so much. And Rob, great way to kick this off. There's just so much going on. As you look at this also, we see the whole food security changing considerably globally. We see as of the end of April, the agricultural cereal, rice export prices on all of those have closed, about 10 to 11% lower. Domestic food prices, as we all know, the inflation has gone up high and has hit almost all low, middle, and high income countries very hard. Uh, there is a figure that I saw out of World Bank, out of their 23 global report on the food crisis, that indicates 258 million people in 58 countries are at worse levels of food insecurity than they have been at any time in the last decade, and we see that going. We know the trends are there. We know they're aggravated by the global conflicts we have today. We also know that it is very important. We cannot get by without it. We can see though that we see it particularly if you look at uh, low income countries, severe impact. Uh, and across all of them as well, because we're seeing double-digit inflation in many places, and particularly if you look the most affected countries is Africa, North America, Latin America, South Asia, Europe, and Central Asia. So it is a global problem that is there, and how can we do it? How can we put the pieces together to make it work? And we're seeing responses. We're seeing folks like the World Bank, IDB, USAID, and others trying to make money available to help finance, particularly the short and longer term responses on how to boost food and nutrition security. How do you reduce the risk? How do you strengthen the food systems? How do you facilitate increased trade in food? And how do you support the very vulnerable people? And finally, how do you invest in the food and the agricultural security that we need in today's world, in today's global environment? So those are some of the big issues I see, Dr. Sharif, and I am looking forward to see Rob and what he goes from here.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. David Smith. USA produce different technology for agriculture. Can you share some of the technology which will be helpful for us?
Well,
So,
certainly we've made some inroads in terms of indoor factory farms. The yields have been good. The complete elimination of pesticides and the elimination of fertilizers, at least as they might reach groundwater or lakes and streams. So they tend to be safer, that they are resistant against, depending on the structure of the building, because not a lot of things have been holding up against hurricanes and tornadoes of late. But at least short of extreme conditions, they seem to be able to weather most storms. And if they're placed in areas that aren't likely to have earthquakes or flooding, then they can be sustained during a localized or even a state level catastrophe. They don't have issues with regard to forest fires or some of the other climate events that are coming through, and they can be very effective. On top of that, we've had huge breakthroughs in terms of robotic equipment. The robotic equipment does a better job when you're talking about using pesticides or fertilizers, of applying just a minute amount on or around the plant, as opposed to flooding the area with the chemicals, making it less likely the pesticides or fertilizers will cause harm. They can also use things like lasers to take care of weeds, as opposed to herbicides, which are also carcinogenous and can cause severe problems. My uncle, just to give you a sense, who was a farmer, he died because of the misuse of pesticides, and it was an ugly way to go. Massive cancer. He was about the size he was when he was 12 when he finally passed, and did not die easy, blaming his wife the entire time for killing him. She had nothing to do with it. The technologies that are being applied from artificial intelligence through robotics, through these building-based factory farms, all can be applied to address a number of the problems we have, but they come with a cost, and that does mean that the effort has to be funded. Initially, clearly, the cost is going to be more than traditional farming, but the overall benefit is much higher yields per acre. Or in some cases, they're talking about a building per square foot, and the ability to survive climate disasters. So a much more predictable food yield, a much more consistent food quality, and much lower levels of contamination and energy use, and particularly water use. Farming uses a massive amount of water, much of which runs off into the ocean and is wasted, some of which gets contaminated and reinduced into the ecosystem. And if you can just limit that one aspect of farming and limit the related damage, you can address a number of the drought issues that a variety of countries and states here in the United States are experiencing. So there are ways to address these problems, but as I say, they don't come without cost, and that means they've got to be a priority in terms of government funding, financing, and assistance.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith. Like, what do you think? Like, example, country like Bangladesh is a very small country, highly density populated countries, and because of climate change, because of developing different projects and everything, we are losing lands. So we have some sort of export and import oriented imbalance. So how the modern technology can help country like Bangladesh to solve this agricultural problem in this complex situation? Can you unmute yourself, please?
Very, very, very good questions as you put that together. You know, if I look at Bangladesh and some of what I've seen from the outside looking in, and I have to answer this from that perspective. As we look at some of the challenges, some of them are water related in Bangladesh. What can we do to help the water side of them? Some of them are looking at the conditions of the soil. We need to look at those. Some of those are the logistics. Logistics are very important for food security and agriculture. How can Bangladesh begin to improve those? Some of them, other ones are very interesting, is that while we were talking, I pulled up a couple of statistics on Bangladesh in this area. And, you know, I think technology innovation will help. There's some of the more precision farming approaches, the precision agriculture approaches. Some of the ways where we can look at using hydroponics and other things would be Bangladesh with your density and everything is a perfect example of how to go and look at high density agriculture and something that would work well there. But there's so many different ones, but it's hard for me not being there to answer your questions with much detail and things. But I know as we look and would work with you, your government, and the industry there, we could put together a clear roadmap on how this could be implemented very well in there.
Mr. Rob, what's your response on that particular question?
In what way?
Okay, my question is that, like, I share a complex situation right now. We have small land, highly density populated countries. We have lack of technologies because of different project developments and commercial places. We are losing land for agriculture. How we can introduce new innovations in agriculture and which can produce more food, and it can give us food security.
Well, vertical farming is if you've got limited land, vertical farming then becomes the answer. Vertical farming is what I was talking about before with regard to indoor, basically manufactured farming, and it uses very little square footage for its yields. You can build vertically. You can build to the structure to survive climate change. You can highly automate it if you want. You can use people if you don't. But when you talk about vertical farming, it does lend itself to high automation, low head count, low pollution, low energy use, low water use, and it is extremely sustainable. So moving away from, if you've got limited land use, moving away from, and particularly if you've got water issues, moving away from traditional farming would seem to be the way to go, and then trying to become a leader in vertical farming so that you begin to sell the technology that you develop to other countries, making it ever more profitable and more viable. If you continue to have to purchase food from out of country and ship it in, then your citizens are paying basically a high cost for their food supplies. And in the case of natural disaster, war, or other catastrophic problems, you may not be able to assure the food supply if it's coming from outside the country. So that being able to build an internal capability to feed your populace and assure that they've got the three basics: enough food, clean water, and medicine. That's one of the three pillars is food. If you can't do that, your country quickly becomes non-viable.
I want to know more about what is the food and safety situation right now in North America.
Well, we've got issues.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead.
No, Rob, go ahead. You started.
Yeah, so the food situation in North America is generally have enough. It's being impacted by inflation, which is causing regional problems, but inflation is a worldwide event. It's not really localized. Many, if not most, countries are experiencing inflation at the moment, largely as a spill off of a combination of the Ukraine war and related conflicts and the pandemic recovery, which resulted in a lot of shortages, but doesn't seem to have any adverse impact on demand. And also, we've got issues with regard to livestock pandemics. The bird flu, for instance, has done some pretty ugly things to poultry populations, and the shortage of water connected to climate change, and now an overabundance of water in areas like California, have reduced the land that you can graze beef. Beef is probably is one of the most pollution-centric livestock types. It uses lots of water. The cows put out methane, which is one of the causes for global warming, and the slaughterhouses are not exactly a poster child for the kind treatment of animals, and in and of themselves, they can generate quite a bit of waste. So our situation isn't dire, but it's not great either. The combination of costs, climate change impact, and perhaps an over focus on some of the least sustainable types of agriculture, like raising beef, have been problematic for us.
Mm-hmm. Mr. David.
And I agree with them on that 100%. You begin to look across us. Inflation has begun to have its impact. I can tell you, when I walk into the grocery store here in Texas, I've seen my basic day-to-day commodity purchases probably go up 25%, 30%. Some of them have gone up 100%, which is tough on a family. It's tough to sustain. You look at the companies. The largest grocery company here in the state is having problems getting people to work on as truckers, people working in warehouses to begin to move stuff. Texas has a large agricultural component as well. There's a dramatic shortage of people working in that too, and of people, again, truckers and others who can take it from the farm to be refined and processed and then to the market. And those, as Rob mentioned, are actually from the pandemic and afterthoughts of that, and how the human resource marketplace has changed. I'm encouraged with what I'm seeing is more and more technology beginning to be applied to solve the food security issues and to solve going to a next generation in agriculture. Many of our farms here use heavily geospatial information now. We're seeing Internet of Things sensors going and being embedded in the soil. We're seeing a lot of effort on how can we increase the productivity out of a given acre of land but yet still keep the soil quality and sustainability. Uh, so that is part of what we see here. But, you know, if that is what we're seeing here, as I look at the rest of the world and the current geopolitical environment, uh, I think we're not alone in this. And as I look at the reports and others, I see in spades that other places have much higher inflation than we have. Other places have much greater food scarcity. You know, I'm encouraged with today seeing that a deal has been brokered for the next 2 months to get more grain out of Ukraine and be able to let that hit the world market. That Turkey and Ukraine and Russia put together and announced today. Um, but we need to see things like that happen. We need to see how can we get collaboration, cooperation to work in a global basis to help food solve the global food security and agricultural challenges we have. So Sharif, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, like you are talking about inflation. So what do you think? It will continue for a long time? Or what is the solution? Because yes, you are correct, because of inflations, food safety, securities, and many things become a problem for everyone.
Well, inflation is caused by a mismatch of demand and supply, so that when you don't have enough supply to meet demand, then prices go up. It can also be caused by people that collude and raise prices because they have the capability of doing so. Typically, various governments have antitrust laws that can move against that kind of activity if they catch it. But we've had both instances being reported here in the States. Because typically when inflation is being driven by economic conditions, then margins don't increase. Margins stay flat or might actually decline, but in some cases margins have been going up, which suggests that some of the folks that are selling these things are taking advantage of the situation. So it's really kind of a determination of what the cause of the problem is. Is the cause a mismatch of demand and supply? In which case, what you do is you move to either shift demand to areas where you have surplus. So if carrots have gone way up, but turnips are down. Convincing people to eat turnips instead of carrots can help solve the problem and adjust the prices. On the other hand, if people are price gouging, then regulatory needs to step in and stop that practice if they're colluding to price gouge. So the competition has been removed from the equation, then the government needs to step in with the regulatory power and reestablish competition, which should naturally keep prices at a more sustainable level. So first step is to determine what the cause of the inflated food prices are, identify areas where they are extreme, and areas where you've got pricing abuse, and then use regulatory powers and marketing powers appropriately to shift demand from areas that are in short supply to areas that have high supply, and to punish the companies and individuals that are misusing their power to raise prices inappropriately and price gouge. So it's a combination of solutions, but the first step is to really understand the cause of the problem, and then base what is a complex solution around what is a complex problem to solve it.
Thank you. Mr. David Smith, do you have any comments on inflation?
Yeah, I do. And what I am very positive as I see is that there is a concerted effort today to begin to address these issues again on a global basis. You know, for example, I mentioned the World Bank study I saw where they, for example, have committed 766 million to the West African Food Resiliency Program. They've gone and put a $105 million project in Jordan. They've put $300 million project in Bolivia, 500 million in Egypt, a $2.3 billion food system resiliency program for Eastern and Southern Africa, just to kind of name a few of them that I saw as we looked at there. And we see the differences happen there. The inflation rates for food in some, like in Argentina, Zimbabwe, Lebanon's a 352% inflation rate for food over the last year. We see it just beginning to go everywhere like that. And we know that the poor are impacted by this even more because they do not have the flexibility to have the difference. Fertilizer prices, for example, have skyrocketed. They're up such a high percentage, and we'll see that. The movement from the agricultural industry, particularly global, has been extremely fossil fuel based in looking at the fuels used in tractors and others. The fossil fuels have been used to make a lot of the fertilizer that was used in there. And we have an impact there. Also, if you go back and look over the last 5 years, 6 years, the impact of extreme weather events, droughts and floods and everything, like Rob mentioned earlier, have been getting just very much more increased. Also, we've seen the movement from the agriculture to more technology-based jobs in city centers as opposed to in the rural environment. And so that is a very important part of what we've seen as well. Unfortunately, the entire ecosystem right now is under stress, and we have to deal with it across the entire ecosystem to be able to make a truly big difference in this area.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, when we discuss about food security and agriculture, climate change playing a major role. And because of the climate change, I think agriculture production also have a lot of challenges. So what do you think about climate change?
Well, that's where I opened. Climate change is having a major impact on the availability of arable land, and of course it's exacerbated with bad farming practices that don't do things like preserve topsoil or limit the introduction of pesticides and herbicides into the environment, because it doesn't do you any good if you have reduced arable land, and you're contaminating the land you've got. So it does require a very focused approach to first stopping the damage, if you can, certainly the human caused damage to the land that you've got, and then increasing the overall efficiency of the farms, and finally protecting them against climate events, unlikely climate events. So that means, yeah, and David, we can do a short call on what's next after this if you want. So the combined impact of more sustainable farming practices, technology, and in those areas where arable land just isn't available anymore, moving to something like vertical farming could be the solution that you need to address the problem. But very first, you need to stop immediately the damage that's being done to the arable land that you've got. And then you can do other things. If you continue to damage the limited land you've got, you're going to be in a spiral that you won't come back from.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith.
And in many places, we're at that tipping point of the spiral that Rob talked about. There are lands around the world that, according to the International Development Bank, where we've crossed the point to where it's going to take so much effort to return soil to where it can be productive. It's difficult. On one of your earlier programs, Sharif, we talked about the mangroves and how the importance of mangroves were in recovering some of these resources and things. And I think all of those come together. You know, the blackish water is critical for some crops. You go to others, and we've seen that particularly the adverse storms and things have blown away a lot of the very productive topsoil. We've seen pollution have that path. The effects of the greenhouse gases and the global warming have changed how a lot of agriculture can be done and what the crop mix is and how we can be productive with that crop mix. And all of those have to change. You know, there is also a considerable amount of work being done in research labs today on can I produce a strand of seeds? Can I produce other types of crops that work better in the environment we're in now? For example, here in North America, there is the strong possibility of El Nino over the next several years, which will dramatically increase our temperatures here and make the extreme weather, both the droughts and the rain, more extreme than they already are. And so, you know, we have to put plans in place on how to mitigate that and how to do that, and put the tools there. This is critical. I mean, we have to eat, and we have to look at that percentage to be sustainable for our families and things. The impacts of this is global, and things like climate change, things like the war in Europe are changing that. I mean, Ukraine was the world's largest producer of grain, and a lot of that has gone away, and we're seeing that. We're seeing other places in Africa and in South America where part of climate change has changed how their crop productions are. And again, the shortage of workers, and not only skilled workers, but unskilled workers, have dramatically changed to make this even a bigger issue than it was a decade ago or 5 years ago even. So those are some of the things that we have to work through with this, Sharif, to solve this problem globally.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, if you share some of your view about this Ukraine and Russia war, because after this war, this food and safety issue become biggest problem for around the world. And definitely for emerging economy, it's a huge problem. What is the solution we have?
Well, you know, about Ukraine, Russia, the issue is as much transport as it is creation of the food process. Much of the arable land in Ukraine remains unaffected. The difficulty is how do you farm it if the people aren't there, and then once farmed, how do you transport the produce out of the country if your ships are being sunk and your railroads are being blown up? Transport becomes a major problem. Now, for anybody that's not Ukraine, that means you really need to seriously think about producing grain inside the country or finding another alternative source for this food, because the low-cost Ukrainian grain is, at least for the near term, iffy at best. Particularly if Russia follows through with their threat to use tactical nuclear weapons. Depending on where that event occurs, in that case, they could lose a lot of their arable land through radioactive contamination. So long term, this just kind of showcases that you need a strategy to either protect your food supplies so that a hostile power doesn't put them at risk, or to bring them in country so that you can better protect them because they're on your land. Those are kinds of your choices. I'm also developing a very diverse logistics chain for food, so that if one country is unable to supply, you've got other countries you can fall back on. The thing is with that, it can become problematic because pretty much everybody's going to be in that same boat. And if you're all going to secondary or tertiary supplies, not only prices are going to go vertical, but those supplies simply may not be adequate to cover the new war-caused demand. So making sure that your country is self-sustainable, that you have capability in country that at least can handle your basic country's food needs becomes the critical path for the country's success, and something that the Ukrainian war kind of showcases. You really need to assure your own food supplies, and whether that means helping to protect Ukraine as a supplier or establishing those food supplies in country, that's kind of your choice, and it can't be none of the above. Otherwise, you're just going to end up in a world of hurt, which a good deal of the world is right now, because of the lack of ability to get to that Ukrainian grain.
Mr. David Smith, what's your thought about Ukraine and Russia war?
Well, I agree. Even though some of the growing area in Ukraine has been impacted, particularly that down in the southeast side of Ukraine, where there was crops there, the vast majority of their really fertile land is more on the western side and is further away. But the reality also is, as Rob alluded to, it's the people and it's the transport. And, if you look at the current action over the last couple of weeks, the infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure, the power infrastructure within Ukraine has been targeted. And those are things that are necessary to help support agriculture. And the movement of fuel, it does take gasoline and diesel to run tractors and to run transport ships and transport 18-wheelers. And a lot of that's being directed towards the war effort today, rightly so. So there's a whole combination of things that need to be happening in Ukraine. But you see the same thing as if I begin to move further to the southwest, and we're seeing the conflicts around Syria and others, which are impacting some of the food production there, and the output of critical things to support the infrastructure. You go to Africa, and particularly South Africa, and you're seeing some of the events there and some of the conflicts there beginning to impact the food security and agriculture there as well. So it's not just restricted to the Russia-Ukraine war, even though Ukraine was a major player in one of the base commodities, grain, that is a staple everywhere in the world. And I can tell you the grain cost here in the United States has gone up because of the conflict there. So it impacts the global marketplace, Sharif.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, what's your concluding thoughts on this global food safety, securities, and agriculture?
Sure. Well, the first step with any problem is to analyze the cause of the problem, and then apportion resources to address the easiest and most impactful things that you can connected to the problem, and that requires analysis up front, so that you can best use your resources to solve the problems that you've got. Now, expect where everybody is that the causes of the problems can be different. What's common is global warming, global climate change is having an adverse impact globally. And so a lot of the technologies being developed to address that can be shared. Nobody has to reinvent the wheel. We can do this. But as you get underneath that, some of the underlying issues are maybe too much water, flooding, too little water, drought, or the human-created causes of contamination that all need different solutions to address, with the end-all be-all being that perhaps bringing farming closer to the people that consume the produce being the most sustainable way to approach the problem, because that addresses both the production of the material as well as the transport. And both of those things are at risk with hostilities likely to increase between nations, and global climate change having an adverse impact on the way we deliver products. It may very well be that it could become not cost effective to deliver produce overseas, for instance, if weather events continue to increase and the likelihood of a ship foundering or sinking increases with it with these weather events. So long term, bring production closer to where it's consumed, addressing the logistics issues, and focus heavily on sustainable methods of production, and then shift demand from population demand from food supplies like beef that are incredibly wasteful and harmful to the environment to other sources of protein that are less so. Even poultry's a lot cleaner than beef. So an overarching strategy based on the problems that you're experiencing, designed to address the problems as they will exist in the 2030s, would be my advice at this point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
This is one of the times when Rob and I are, I think, 100% in agreement with everything we've said today, because the issues are so clear and so much up where it's going worldwide. Food security really means having at all times both physical and economic access to food to meet the needs for a productive and healthy life. And a lot of food insecurity is rooted in poverty, and it has long-term impacts on the ability of families, communities, and countries to develop and prosper. It affects their economic development, and it ripples across the whole area. Prolonged undernourishment, as we've seen globally, slows the cognitive development in people, and it increases the amount of disease that we see. As we said earlier in the program, more than 800 million people across the globe go to bed hungry every night. And many of them are small farmers who farm very little, and they depend on agriculture to make a living and feed their family. And even though there's an explosion in the growth of the urban environments, but also in the growth of urban slums, nearly 75% of the very poor people in developing countries live in the rural areas. And that section needs to grow dramatically, because farm to fork is the term has been shown twice as effective at reducing the food security issues as other sectors. So, how do we invest in them? How do we expect to feed a population that is to grow to 9 billion people by 2050? At the least, we're going to have to double our current food production. We're going to have to look at the other resources. Rob is 100% right that we need to look at other types of foods. We need to look at ways to look at production of other types of proteins. Even though I love a very good prime rib or a New York strip, I know those are beginning to be priced out of my market, at least, too. And as Rob says, they contribute to part of the sustainability of the environment. And we have to do all of these things around food, understanding we're in a time of where the global temperatures are increasing. It's predicted that in the next 2 years, it's going to go up 1.5 degrees, which is going to be very unsustainable. It should be going down. So how do we do this with all these complex interactions? And Sharif, you've heard me say many times, it's a system of systems. Well, in agriculture, food security, the logistics, the technologies coming to bear to try to be more productive and increase our outputs. All of these are something that has to work. And again, it's not a developed nation's problem. It's not just a developing nation's problem. It's a problem across the entire ecosystem in the world. And we have to address this that whole way, is how do we can we do that on an ecosystem level to solve these problems? The types of programs you do like this, the type of interactions you do like this, are vitally important for us being able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with your government agency, corporation and academy. And hopefully through this dialogue and taking a lot of initiative in real world, we can solve complex problem. So thank you, Mr. Rob, and thank you, Mr. David Smith, for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.